As of 2025, a large share of baby boomers still remain in the workforce, and many of them are not leaving by choice. Instead, they're being pushed into retirement years earlier than they planned. In this video, I'll show you 3 immediate costs of being forced out: running out of money sooner than expected, losing affordable healthcare before Medicare kicks in, and hitting a wall in the job market. Many boomers lack sufficient savings to handle an abrupt exit. The typical retirement account balance is far below what financial independence actually requires. And that's where the real story begins. Retirement stops being a choice. The moment retirement stops being a choice. Retirement was never designed to unfold this way. For decades, it carried the image of a hard-earned reward. The end of steady years of work marked by farewells, reflections, and the chance to finally focus on family, hobbies, or travel. But that picture no longer matches reality. Today, retirement for many baby boomers isn't marked by a chosen timeline, but by circumstances outside their control. About 15% of the U.S. labor force in 2024 was made up of boomers, and surveys from Transamerica show a large share expected to work past 65. Yet what we're actually seeing is employers steering those timelines through restructuring, downsizing, and technology shifts that leave workers with little say. One scene illustrates the pattern clearly. A long-tenured employee arrives for what seems like an ordinary Friday, only to be called into a brief meeting and handed separation paperwork. By the afternoon, they leave carrying a box with desk items, walking out not from choice, but from a company-wide decision. It's abrupt and disorienting, and while the details vary from worker to worker, the story has become familiar enough that it no longer feels like anecdote, it feels like routine. Behind these exits are predictable forces rather than accidents or isolated acts. Corporate restructuring plays an outsized role. Companies under pressure to stay competitive often frame these decisions as streamlining moves or as aligning to new strategies. That framing is partly true, but it also means specific individuals, often with decades of service, are suddenly unneeded. A department once considered central can vanish after one management meeting, not because the work lacked value, but because budgets and markets shifted. For the individual whose security was rooted in that role, it leaves no option but early retirement, whether planned or not. Automation adds another dimension. NBR research has shown that increased computerization in workplaces has historically raised retirement probabilities, especially among older workers. As tasks are automated or digital tools become central to operations, higher-paid senior employees may be seen as less cost-effective for the functions that remain. Even if experienced workers are capable of adapting, companies often prefer younger staff who can do the redefined jobs at lower salaries. It isn't always a question of willingness, but of perception. Firms see efficiency mostly in financial terms, not institutional memory or adaptability. Cost pressures are equally significant. By the time workers reach their 60s, they frequently carry salaries and benefits higher than those paid to younger colleagues. Healthcare premiums in particular make older employees stand out in budget reviews. For executives tasked with trimming expenses, these numbers matter more than loyalty, proficiency, or tenure. Ironically, long service that once seemed like a guarantee of stability now makes workers the most expensive line items, placing them first on the list when cuts are discussed. The outcome has been a steady rise in retirements that are not voluntary. Transamerica's reports show many older workers intend to extend their careers, but workforce realities contradict those intentions. Across industries, finance, retail, construction, even education, exits are triggered less by personal readiness and more by external forces. A teacher near retirement age might be nudged toward early incentive packages. A construction veteran might find younger crews labeled more fit for the job and hired at lower wages. An engineer with decades on the job may hear that their role no longer matches the company's future direction. None of these cases point to a single master plan against older workers. Instead, they reflect overlapping factors, economic, technological, and cost-driven, that converge to shrink options. The changes reach both white-collar and blue-collar employment. Nurses in healthcare report being subtly reassigned until stepping down becomes the only practical move. Office professionals find promotions disappearing and workloads reduced, making continued employment unsustainable. Skilled tradespeople face similar dismissals framed in terms of efficiency or endurance. The consistent thread is that hard work and loyalty no longer guarantee that. ability to choose when to retire. For many, the emotional toll is as destabilizing as the financial impact. Plans to retire alongside a spouse or to wait until children finish school vanish in an afternoon. The sense of conclusion that used to come with retirement, the ability to write one's own final chapter, has been replaced with uncertainty and loss. Workers describe the experience less as finishing a journey and more as being told to stop mid-course. That shift erodes not just security but dignity. These trends now appear common enough to suggest a new normal. For late-stage boomers, the expectation of controlling the timing of retirement is less realistic with each passing year. Data shows a substantial share are exiting earlier than they intended, reshaping retirement from an earned milestone to something closer to an externally imposed deadline. Once pushed out, re-entry into the workforce at a comparable level is rare, making the transition effectively permanent. The result is a generation reaching the end of their careers in ways that look profoundly different from the story many assumed. They prepared for retirement as if it would be voluntary, yet the reality is that external pressures have taken that choice away. What's striking is that these are not isolated hardships, but part of a broader pattern affecting thousands across industries at the same time. And it raises a crucial question. If years of expertise, proven track records, and decades of commitment no longer secure job stability, then what calculations are companies actually using to decide who stays and who goes? That is where the real explanation begins. Why companies are quietly pushing out boomers. You might expect decades of accumulated experience to make an employee indispensable. Someone in their 60s has worked through recessions, adapted to multiple waves of new technology, and managed organizational upheavals that younger coworkers only know from textbooks. They carry lessons that could help a team avoid repeating past mistakes. Yet these same workers are often among the first to be dismissed. Why? The answer has less to do with capability than with the way companies calculate value today. In modern boardrooms, experience often gets translated into higher costs, and when paired with budget constraints, it begins to look less like an asset and more like a financial risk. The strongest driver behind this trend is simple economics. Many baby boomers earn the highest wages in their departments, reflecting decades of raises and promotions on a traditional career ladder. When earnings reports come in, executives scanning payrolls see those salaries as an easy lever to reduce costs. One senior employee's compensation can equal the cost of 2 or 3 new hires, which on a spreadsheet makes downsizing appear efficient. Cutting veteran staff allows managers to report immediate savings without explaining more complex fixes to investors. For older employees, that calculation translates into pink slips. Research from Transamerica reinforces this financial pressure, noting that many workers remain in the labor force longer than expected because their own retirement savings cannot cover living costs if they stop working too soon, creating tension between their need to stay and the company's incentive to cut costs. Salary is only part of the expense. Benefits matter just as much, if not more. Health insurance premiums rise significantly with age, and employers must pay more to cover older employees whether or not they use the healthcare system. A 63-year-old in excellent health still costs the company more than a 28-year-old, simply because insurers expect greater medical risk. Across a large workforce, this added expense becomes difficult to ignore, and it tips the balance when executives weigh whom to keep. Even international studies, such as Manulife's research on how employers are reevaluating retirement supports, note this financial tension as one of the forces reshaping workplace demographics. Beyond dollars, there are perceptions that work against older employees. Fast-moving industries assume that younger staff members, described as digital natives, can adapt more quickly to new tools, apps, or platforms. In sectors like finance, logistics, and marketing, the arrival of artificial intelligence, data analytics, and cloud systems has widened that perception gap. Managers often believe that boomers will be slower to adapt, or worse, that they resist change altogether. Even when older employees take initiatives, joining training sessions, self-studying, or gaining certifications, they are often overlooked because the stereotype already lingers. In practical terms, this means a younger colleague is more likely to be offered a retraining assignment, while a 60-something is offered early retirement or severance. Technology itself complicates the situation. The NBR has shown that waves of computerization in the last few decades disproportionately affected older workers, accelerating retirements in industries where automation reshaped tasks. Similar questions now surround artificial intelligence. Some roles traditionally held by older workers are highly automatable, like data processing or standardized clerical tasks. At the same time, newer studies from Stanford and ADP suggest AI disruption also hits younger, entry-level jobs, since those are often structured around routine work that software can replace. The truth is more nuanced than a simple AI pushes out older workers. Automation is reshaping job requirements across all age groups, but for boomers nearing retirement, the result is sharper. Fewer retraining opportunities, limited chance to switch career tracks, and company assumptions that they are already at the end of their professional road. Hiring practices also reinforce this divide. Younger employees are not only cheaper, but also more likely to be framed as having long-term potential. Human resources offices define culture fit in ways that emphasize energy, flexibility, and adaptability, all qualities implicitly coded as youthful. While no HR policy explicitly forbids hiring older staff, these preferences guide decisions about who gets interviews, roles, and promotions. A 25-year-old is considered the future of the company, while a 62-year-old is viewed as nearing the end, even when the latter may still want and need to work another decade. As recent studies highlight, employers increasingly tie workforce planning to long-term strategic visions, which means that anyone not seen as part of that future has limited prospects. Legal protections exist, but they remain uneven. In the United States, age discrimination has been against the law for decades under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. However, enforcement is difficult, and cases are often challenging to prove. In early 2025, lawmakers reintroduced the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, POADA, which aims to strengthen claims processes for victims, though it remains only a proposal for now. Internationally, some jurisdictions provide clearer guidance. For example, Ontario's Human Rights Commission explicitly mandates non-discrimination in employment decisions based on age. Still, even where protections exist, the subtler forms of bias, embedding energy or cultural fit into hiring criteria, rarely trigger legal consequences, leaving older workers exposed. For businesses, these moves are explained not as bias, but as practical necessity. Employers operate in environments where quarter-to-quarter performance determines stock prices and executive bonuses. Rising labor costs, shrinking margins, and volatile markets all increase the pressure to trim expenses quickly. Cutting high-salary employees in their 60s often provides the fastest budget relief. From the company's vantage point, it is about survival, not personal animosity. But for the individuals pushed out, it results in sudden instability, lost income, and a forced retirement they did not plan for. The deeper problem is what gets measured. Intangible strengths, mentorship, decision-making informed by decades of trial and error, or steady leadership through crises, are hard to quantify. In contrast, salaries, benefits, and measurable task completion rates are easy to log, chart, and display at a board meeting. This imbalance means the qualities that make older workers valuable go unseen, while the numbers that make them look expensive become front and center. It is less that management dismisses experience outright, and more that it fails to appear in the categories where decisions are made. Because of that, experience often shifts from being seen as an asset to being regarded as excess baggage. Once that perception takes hold, older workers become the first targets whenever companies restructure. Their higher compensation and benefit costs overshadow their actual performance or expertise. What managers describe as strategic planning or competitive restructuring frequently disguises a straightforward choice. Cut the staff who cost the most, even if they also contribute the most institutional knowledge. It becomes a consistent pattern where loyalty and capability cannot outweigh numbers on a budget report. This explains why the pace of forced retirements has accelerated. Employers present these decisions as part of modernization or efficiency strategies, but the underlying reasons repeat: salaries at their peak, healthcare premiums at their highest, and assumptions of limited adaptability. For baby boomers, this creates an environment where working past 60 becomes increasingly rare, not because of disinterest, but because companies close the door first. The outcome is shaped less by attitude or ambition, and more by forces embedded in how businesses define value. And while this explains why so many boomers are leaving the workforce earlier than intended, it also raises another urgent concern: The reality is that many of these workers did not expect to stop earning so soon. They planned for retirement on the assumption they would leave voluntarily, with years left to build extra savings. When those plans collapse, they face an even more sobering issue. The accounts they have spent decades building often fall short of what they truly need to live on. Next, we'll look at the hard numbers most people miss. Why savings and safety nets are not what you think. The retirement accounts that weren't enough. For years, we assumed that baby boomers had every advantage when it came to retirement. They were the most college-educated generation up to that point. They entered the workforce during decades of strong post-war growth, and many bought homes before housing prices exploded. On paper, it looked like a recipe for broad financial security. Yet as of 2025, the reality for most is sobering. Retirement accounts are much thinner than people realize, and for a large portion of boomers, they barely resemble a safety net at all. The core issue is that the wealth tied to this generation is unevenly distributed. Research from Transamerica reports that the median retirement savings for boomers who have managed to accumulate accounts sits around $270,000. That may sound like a large figure, but over a retirement that can stretch 30 years, it is far from sufficient. And those numbers only reflect the middle of the distribution. Roughly 1 in 3 older Americans, according to Go Banking Rates and Bar, have little to no retirement savings at all. This division within the same generation tells the true story. Some boomers are doing fine, but millions are facing retirements with virtually no private cushion. A major structural shift explains much of this outcome. In the 1970s and 1980s, employers began phasing out pensions in favor of 401k-style accounts. Pensions had guaranteed income for life, as long as workers stayed with their company. By contrast, 401k-s placed the responsibility squarely on individuals to contribute, invest wisely, and ride out decades of market cycles. Younger employees who began saving early had time to let compounding work in their favor. But late boomers were already in mid-career when this transition took hold. Entering the system in their 30s or 40s left them with fewer years of compounding, and many never made up the difference. For them, the financial rules changed mid-game, and the impact is permanent. This pension to 401k switch created a two-track reality even within the boomer generation itself. Early boomers, born in the late 1940s or early 1950s, often kept some pension benefits while also tapping into newer accounts. Late boomers, born in the 1960s, were caught in between. They often ended up with a patchwork of small accounts spread across multiple employers, and no pension to provide a baseline guarantee. The result, decades later, is smaller balances that fail to match the promises pensions once delivered. The timing of economic crises compounded these problems. The Great Recession that began in 2008 hit late boomers during their peak earning years. Researchers at Boston College and Transamerica both document that incomes and savings for this group suffered lasting declines. For those in their 50s, the damage was almost impossible to undo. Job losses meant halted contributions, and some workers resorted to early 401k withdrawals that permanently reduced balances. Although markets eventually recovered, the lost years of compounding left retirement accounts far smaller than they otherwise would have been. Just a little over a decade later came the pandemic shock of 2020. Many older workers lost jobs, and a significant share never re-entered the workforce. Some drained savings to cover immediate expenses. Others paused contributions permanently. For people in their 60s, the recovery period was not long enough to rebuild what evaporated in that short, turbulent stage. While younger workers had time on their side, older boomers found themselves locked out of the rebound. The result across the generation has been striking. While headlines often note that baby boomers still hold significant aggregate wealth, much of that is concentrated in the highest income households or tied up in home equity. For middle-class boomers, retirement accounts look more like emergency funds than true nest eggs. Imagine spending 40 years in the workforce and reaching retirement with only $30,000 or $40,000 put aside. At safe withdrawal rates of about 3 to 4% per year, that translates into a yearly sum too small to cover even groceries, let alone housing or healthcare. This distribution gap often gets masked when commentators rely on averages. Average balances are lifted upward by the wealthiest households, retirees with millions saved. But the median, which represents the typical saver, lands far lower. For many, the balance they've accumulated over decades, will sustain only a year or two of basic living expenses. Put bluntly, what looks like a lifetime of work has resulted in too little to bridge the decades many boomers will live after leaving employment. The problem grows sharper when viewed alongside Social Security. For most, it will be the foundational source of income. But the benefit amount depends heavily on the timing of when people file. If someone claims benefits as early as age 62 instead of at the full retirement age of 67, the monthly check falls dramatically. The Social Security Administration's projections show this clearly. A benefit worth about $1,930 at 67 shrinks to roughly $1,342 at 62. That reduction is permanent, and for those with small savings accounts, it leaves their retirement budgets thinner every month for the rest of their lives. This shortfall makes involuntary retirement especially punishing. If boomers had entered this stage with strong balances, a forced exit from the workforce would have been inconvenient but survivable. Instead, leaving the job market in their 60s often eliminates their last chance to build up those accounts. It leaves households with shallow savings, reduced Social Security benefits if taken early, and costs that continue to climb. Some boomers adapt by cutting back wherever they can. Households downsize, move to less expensive cities, or cut discretionary spending sharply. While these strategies stretch budgets, they cannot multiply existing savings into something more sustainable. A modest account balance is still a modest account balance, no matter how aggressively it is rationed. Without the time left to rebuild contributions or capture compounding, these efforts are limited to making do rather than creating security. What's important to recognize is that this outcome was not simply a matter of individuals failing to plan. Boomers faced stagnant wages in many industries, medical expenses that absorbed large chunks of paychecks, and housing markets that escalated dramatically. They watched retirement systems flip from defined benefit pensions to defined contribution plans, just as they were arriving at mid-career. And they endured two major financial crises that interrupted saving right when they could least afford it. Even diligent savers found themselves falling behind under these conditions. When we zoom out across the entire generation, the numbers speak clearly. The median savings figure is too low to guarantee independence. A third of older Americans report having no retirement account at all. For forced retirees, that means stepping into retirement not with the power of choice, but with almost no financial options. They are left with Social Security alone, or with minimal savings that cannot sustain the lifestyle they had pictured. This disconnect between the story of a wealthy generation and the everyday financial reality is why the pressure feels so sharp today. Retirement accounts were expected to secure freedom, but for millions, they are delivering only anxiety. What should have been a cushion at the end of long careers is for many little more than a thin layer of padding. And for those who must now leave the workforce, the next step is far from comfortable. Forced retirement doesn't just signal the end of a career. It also places older workers in the difficult position of figuring out what to do when savings are inadequate and expenses do not stop. And that's where the next challenge begins, because ending a job is one thing, but trying to start over past the age of 60 presents a new set of challenges entirely. The brutal reality of job hunting past 60. For many boomers who are forced out earlier than expected, the obvious next step seems simple: go find another job. But what actually happens when someone in their early 60s, with 3 or 4 decades of experience, begins sending out applications? Despite the resume that looks strong on paper, older applicants quickly encounter barriers that make re-entry into the workforce far harder than they ever imagined. Decades of steady employment and proven reliability do not insulate them from screening biases that research and legal reports have long documented. Studies from sources such as Transamerica and the National Bureau of Economic Research confirm that when older workers lose their jobs, they frequently face longer periods of unemployment than their younger peers. What many expect will be a temporary setback often stretches into months, or even years, without success. From the applicant's side, the process often starts with silence. Resumes vanish into applicant tracking systems with no acknowledgement. If an interview does occur, it may conclude with one of a handful of polite but familiar phrases. Overqualified, not the best fit, or we've decided to go in another direction. At first, these phrases sound neutral, even professional. Over time, their repetition communicates something less neutral. They act as coded rejections, often tied more to age than ability. Employment law guidance has picked up on this coded language, too. The Ontario Human Rights Commission, for example, has documented that words like overqualified or seeking someone with more career potential are often euphemisms, convenient shields for decisions driven partly by age-related assumptions. The term overqualified illustrates the problem well. Ostensibly, it suggests a candidate is too skilled, carrying more experience than a role requires. Yet in practice, hiring managers use it for reasons rarely stated outright. They may assume an older applicant expects a higher salary. They may worry that retirement is imminent and tenure will be short. Or they may believe, without evidence, that someone with decades behind them will be less adaptable or less willing to take direction. None of these assumptions are guaranteed to be true, but the label gives employers a benign-sounding reason to make the resume disappear. This mismatch between what older workers bring and what employers reward is reinforced by the way job postings are written. It is increasingly common to see ads peppered with words like energetic, adaptable, and fast-paced. These descriptors never directly exclude candidates over 60, but to applicants who have seen them repeatedly, the underlying signal is clear. The company is picturing someone much younger. Add to this the common phrase cultural fit, which is elastic enough to justify almost any choice. In practice, culture in many offices translates to after-hours socializing, tech-forward collaboration styles, or informal team dynamics built around staff in their 20s and 30s. A 60-something joining that environment isn't framed as someone who could guide or mentor, but as someone who might not blend. Another factor is how employers think about potential. A 28-year-old applicant is often viewed as an investment with decades ahead, while a 62-year-old is assumed to be a shorter-term solution. Both may be equally capable today, but the younger hire is awarded the intangible bonus of future growth. That perspective, shaped around longevity rather than immediate skill, tilts decisions before they are even made. For older job seekers, the experience can feel like a long cycle of rejection. Consider one recent case mirrored in many accounts. A 62-year-old project manager, laid off after years at a stable firm, spends half a year submitting over 150 applications. Each resume highlights skills directly tied to the listed requirement, backed with professional references. The returns? A handful of interviews, all ending after one round with polite rejections. By contrast, his younger colleague displaced in the same layoff secures a role within weeks. The younger applicant didn't have nearly the same experience, but was perceived as costing less, adapting faster, and contributing longer. That contrast is not anecdote. It matches broader labor research, showing consistent gaps in unemployment durations by age group. These prolonged searches extract a heavy toll. Submitting resume after resume with negligible response wears down even confident professionals. Experienced workers report that after months of silence, the entire job hunt starts to feel performative, an exercise in futility rather than hope. When offers go to younger candidates with fewer skills, frustration turns to resignation. It is no surprise that surveys record older job seekers as spending more time unemployed, taking longer to transition, and facing reduced reemployment earnings compared to their prior roles. And these barriers aren't confined to just one sector. Industries with rising demand, like healthcare, often sidestep older applicants in favor of younger workers with lower salary expectations. Even in professional fields like finance, education, or project management, 60-somethings find themselves overlooked despite decades of relevant successes. In technology roles, the obstacles are sharper still. A 60-year-old programmer or systems manager can be dismissed before an interview simply because the industry assumes that youth correlates directly with technical fluency. Job descriptions themselves can act as a filter. A listing may specify recent experience in a platform that evolves every few years, sidelining candidates who have transferable skills but who worked in systems considered outdated. Employers then rationalize passing over older candidates by saying the role requires someone better aligned. But as employment experts remind us, phrases such as better aligned or fresh perspective often carry the same euphemistic weight as overqualified. Language that provides cover while avoiding direct mention of age. technology adds another layer of complexity. Historical research from the NBR indicates that computerization disproportionately pressured older workers, raising retirement rates among those unable or unwilling to adapt to rapidly changed roles. Today, the conversation involves artificial intelligence. CBS reports citing Stanford and ADP remind us that generative AI recently hit younger entry-level jobs especially hard, since those positions often involve predictable, repetitive work that can be automated. Meanwhile, historical evidence suggests that new waves of technology frequently threatened older workers first, as companies assumed they'd struggle to adapt. The outcome is uneven and situational. AI's impact is mixed, but perception makes older workers seem costlier to retrain, and so they often get fewer chances to prove adaptability. The legal framework does exist to protect older job seekers, but with limited practical effect. In the United States, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act forbids hiring bias based on age, yet proving such claims remains an uphill battle. Employers have significant leeway to cite culture, flexibility, or future potential as shaping hiring decisions. Lawsuits are rare, costly, and typically require clear evidence. As mentioned, Ontario's laws go further to explicitly identify terms like overqualified as euphemisms that may mask age discrimination. But even with such guidance, subtle patterns persist. Extended unemployment for older applicants, lower callback rates, and comments about fit that are near impossible to dispute formally. Financial repercussions from these failed job searches are immediate. Every missed paycheck during a prolonged search often forces boomers to dip into whatever retirement savings they do have. Funds intended to support decades of post-employment life get reallocated to cover groceries, utility bills, or mortgage payments right now. Unlike a younger worker who can make those savings back with years of continued contributions, a worker in their 60s has little time left for recovery. Compounding growth is interrupted permanently. The retirement cushion shrinks even as the eventual retirement horizon grows closer. Emotional costs run in parallel. Older workers report not just stress, but loss of identity when job applications yield no progress. For those who built their self-image through decades of work, consistent rejection communicates a devaluing message. The skills and loyalty that once defined them are no longer wanted. The discouragement mounts over time. For many, what starts as confidence erodes into a quiet acceptance that companies are unlikely to say yes again. The combination of stalled savings, extended unemployment, and mounting rejection shapes one of the hardest realities of being forced out after 60. The pathway back into work is steep at best and closed at worst. Employers may praise experience in principle, but when balanced against perceptions of cost, adaptability, and longevity, older job seekers repeatedly find themselves on the wrong side of the decision. And that reality isn't just about the money in their accounts or the stability of future pensions. For many, month after month of rejection reshapes more than finances. It begins to wear down their confidence, their sense of purpose, and even their mental health. Forced retirement, combined with the brutal odds against reemployment, becomes not just a financial strain, but a personal reckoning. The next challenge is understanding what it feels like to lose not only a paycheck, but also the identity and stability built over decades of work. The psychological toll no one talks about. When forced retirement comes sooner than expected, what doesn't get enough attention is the emotional strain that follows. The headlines focus on income gaps, savings shortfalls, or Medicare eligibility, but behind those numbers is another layer: the psychological toll no one talks about. Research and advocacy groups like AARP and the Financial Health Network have noted rising anxiety and depression risks among older adults facing sudden unemployment or early retirement. It isn't just about what people can afford. It's about how they cope when a central part of their lives disappears without warning. For many boomers, the abrupt stop feels less like entering freedom and more like watching a core piece of their identity slip away. Work wasn't just a place to clock in. It defined routine, purpose, and standing. A title like nurse, supervisor, or engineer functioned as shorthand for ability and worth. When that disappears overnight, replaced by a vague label like retired, the transition doesn't feel complete or voluntary. It feels like a loss. And unlike financial accounts that can be measured, this loss is harder to put into numbers. The change becomes most obvious in the small habits of a week. Imagine someone who for 30 years woke up to prepare for their commute, sit at their desk, and tackle projects with deadlines. On Monday, the alarm rings, but there's nowhere to go. At first, that empty day might feel like rest. Soon, though, days stretch without structure. What used to be time filled with colleagues, meetings, and problem-solving turns into a quiet that weighs heavier each week. The absence of routine doesn't register as extra leisure. It registers as uncertainty. This absence is not benign. Losing a job abruptly triggers stresses that reverberate into mental health. Work provides more than wages. It offers a sense of belonging, a community of peers, and milestones that validate effort. Without that, many retirees describe each day as drifting, not resting. Studies on older workers confirm that unexpected job losses correlate with higher depression risks. What makes it so painful is the feeling of being set aside after decades of loyalty, as if dedication only lasted until a balance sheet turned red. People internalize this in ways that change not just how they see their careers, but how they see themselves. For those caught unprepared, the psychological weight compounds. Bills, mortgages, or health expenses do not pause because a career has ended. Someone might have planned carefully for retirement at 67, but losing their position at 61 collapses those plans. Instead of rehearsing a gradual path toward stability, they are forced into a cutoff point with no adjustment period. This mismatch turns every bill into a reminder that the timeline they relied upon has disintegrated. Anxiety grows not only from the math, but from the shock of losing control over their own timetable. That strain filters into every corner of daily life. Stress builds at night, turning sleep irregular. Fatigue makes motivation harder the next day. Home relationships absorb the pressure. Spouses navigate tension around finances and plans. Adult children quietly worry about parents' stability. For some, irritability and low patience creep in, and what used to be steady confidence shrinks. The person who once solved problems at work without hesitation suddenly feels powerless in the job market, and that disconnect alters self-esteem. Occasionally, humor acts as a shield. Many forced retirees joke about how they spend mornings refreshing inboxes for rejection emails or learning the quirks of yet another online job portal. They laugh at daytime television filling the silence. But the humor is thin cover, masking unease. Even if levity takes the edge off for a moment, underneath sits a persistent fear. This isn't leisure, this is exclusion. Over time, these experiences reshape identity. At the start, someone may call themselves in transition. Months later, after applications yield no response, they begin to edit out parts of their professional history. They may avoid saying manager or expert because they worry it draws attention to age. Slowly, their sense of self contracts, shifting from professional contributor to unemployed statistic. Each rejection adds weight to that narrowing. The more diminished they feel, the harder it becomes to approach new opportunities with confidence. Another consequence comes through isolation. Offices are not just workplaces, but social hubs. Passing conversations, shared lunches, and small jokes tie into a daily rhythm that provides connection. When job loss severs this, the flow of casual community vanishes. Former colleagues move forward in their jobs. Friends who retired earlier may not understand what being forced out feels like. This limbo leaves many boomers not fully part of the workforce, but not comfortably retired either. Left in the in-between, feelings of loneliness grow sharper. Beneath these outcomes lies a deeper sense of betrayal. Decades spent with the same company often build in expectation of loyalty in both directions. When those careers end through dismissal rather than choice, trust is broken. The impact lingers, reshaping how people relate to institutions, not just employers, but even systems like retirement savings plans or government programs. A common theme appears. Once age turns you into a high cost, visibility fades. Many describe this invisibility as harsher than the financial hit itself. Ironically, what outsiders imagine as more free time often becomes its own burden. Days without obligations sound like liberty in theory, but under forced retirement, they serve as reminders of being shut out. Time that could have been filled with travel or hobbies now feels like empty space. For people who pictured retirement as earned freedom, this kind of sudden disconnection feels instead like relevance has been cut away. Research following older adults even indicates heightened risks of mental health challenges after involuntary exit, reinforcing what many already know firsthand. Analysts and advocacy groups now frame this as more than just an economic shift. They argue it reflects an emotional health crisis layered onto a financial one. Savings gaps are measurable, but the larger human cost spreads invisibly into identity, community, and purpose. Forcing someone out strips more than income. It alters how people define themselves and how they believe society defines them. Families, communities, and health providers ultimately absorb these consequences. What may look on the surface like a single career decision ripples through broader systems. If you're watching and worried, take some comfort in knowing later we'll cover practical steps that can soften the impact, financial and legal moves that help stabilize the shock of early retirement. This psychological weight is real, but there are strategies for reducing the damage when it happens. The key point here is that the toll isn't measured in savings statements alone. It appears in confidence diminished, connections disrupted, and purpose eroded. Forced retirement has quietly grown into a dual crisis, straddling both the financial and emotional. And for anyone who might face it, understanding this hidden cost is crucial, because the next challenge is not just recognizing the problem, but knowing where to start if it happens to you. What to do if it happens to you. So what can you actually do the day it happens? When the meeting with your manager or HR ends and you walk out holding a folder you didn't ask for, the choices you make next will shape everything that follows. There isn't one solution that works for everyone, but there is a sequence of urgent steps that can help you stabilize the shock. Think of this as a checklist. Concrete moves you can make that will determine whether an early exit turns into a downward spiral or into a managed transition. The first step is about paperwork. When a severance agreement is placed in front of you, do not sign it immediately. What looks like a standard form is actually a negotiable contract. Employers present it quickly in hopes you will accept it without question, but research and legal commentary are clear. You have the right to slow down. In fact, if you are over 40 in the United States, federal law gives you 21 days to review any waiver connected to the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, and 45 days if the termination is part of a group layoff. That time is not theoretical. It is written into the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, OWBPA. Use it. Ask for a copy, take it home, and read every line. Do not feel pressured to sign in the room. Once you have the agreement in hand, look closely for waivers that strip away legal claims. Many severance packages ask employees to release the company from age discrimination lawsuits in exchange for payment. Whether you intend to pursue a claim or not, signing away rights blindly is risky. This is why even a single consultation with an employment attorney matters. According to attorneys at firms that focus on severance law, reviewing documents early exposes the hidden conditions, clauses about restricting future work, releasing claims, or limiting benefits. A lawyer can explain what is standard and what isn't, and even a short meeting can prevent costly mistakes. The agreement itself is where negotiation begins. Law firm guidance and HR resources alike emphasize that companies often have flexibility if you know what to request. Consider negotiating extra weeks of severance pay, extended health benefit coverage or COBRA premiums paid for a few months, accelerated vesting for any stock or options, or even outplacement services to help with your next role. Some attorneys recommend requesting a positive reference letter or more time to exercise stock options. The script is straightforward. Present your value clearly, document your contributions, and make professional but specific requests. Companies may say no, but often they agree to more than people. Expect when they see you've done your homework. After severance, the next decision many boomers face is Social Security. The natural impulse is to file immediately. After all, the paycheck just stopped, and the bills are still coming. But here the numbers matter. Claiming at 62 permanently reduces benefits compared to waiting until full retirement age. For example, Social Security estimates show that someone who would receive about $1,930 a month at 67 will collect only around $1,342 if they claim at 62. That gap doesn't shrink over time, it is locked in forever. Each year of delay boosts your eventual benefit. This is why experts urge anyone with even a small financial cushion to pause before filing. If you can bridge expenses another way, the long-term payout is worth it. One option some people overlook is the rule of 55. As Kiplinger explains, if you separate from your employer in the calendar year that you turn 55 or later, you may withdraw from that employer's 401k without the usual 10% early withdrawal penalty. The catch is that this only applies to the 401k from your last employer. Rolling it into an IRA voids the rule. For people leaving jobs between 55 and 59, this can provide penalty-free access to cash while delaying Social Security. Knowing this detail can buy you time to avoid the steep early claim reductions. Of course, retirement accounts should not be treated like checking accounts. Every dollar withdrawn early shrinks what you'll have later. That's why experts emphasize pairing withdrawals with major cost reductions. Small cuts in day-to-day spending don't stretch savings far enough. Instead, target large expenses. Downsize housing, refinance loans, or sell a vehicle. For some, this feels extreme, but these moves create breathing room quickly. Dropping a mortgage payment or unloading high-interest debt shifts the balance far more than skipping a coffee subscription ever will. Healthcare coverage is another urgent decision. If you are not yet eligible for Medicare, gaps in insurance can be financially and medically dangerous. COBRA is often the first option. It extends your employer coverage for up to 18 months, though at a higher cost. Sometimes companies will cover part of your COBRA premiums as part of severance if you negotiate. If COBRA is unaffordable, the Affordable Care Act marketplace offers alternatives based on household income. No matter the route, the key is to decide immediately. Allowing coverage to lapse even for a few weeks opens you to catastrophic risk if an illness or accident occurs. Another critical piece of the checklist is rebuilding some kind of structure. Losing a long-term role often breaks daily routines, which can compound stress. Setting a new schedule brings purpose back into the day. Some approach it like a replacement job. Wake up at a set time, dedicate mornings to job search or networking, afternoons to skills or projects, evenings to personal priorities. Communities and nonprofits offer workshops and training specifically for older workers. Using them keeps you visible in your professional sphere. Remember, forced retirement doesn't always mean nobody will hire you. Consulting projects, contract work, or mentoring roles are options if you remain active in networks. People who retreat completely often miss the few opportunities that do appear. Part-time and consulting income deserve a place in this immediate plan. While searching for mainstream employment may be discouraging, smaller, short-term roles can bridge the gap. They not only provide income, but also protect against drawing down retirement accounts too quickly. Even temporary work can prevent early Social Security claims, which, as we've seen, makes a lifelong difference. For family finances, transparency is important. Sit down with your partner or family and recalculate the household budget with realistic income assumptions. List the essentials, housing, healthcare, food, and weigh them against reliable income sources. Identify which savings accounts can be tapped and in what order. Using the rule of 55 first, then considering unemployment benefits, then timed withdrawals, can structure spending in a way that stretches resources instead of exhausting them. Here's the condensed checklist summarized clearly. Do not sign severance immediately. You have 21 days, 45 for group layoffs, to decide under federal law if you're over 40. Consult an employment attorney about waivers, discrimination claims, and hidden clauses before you agree to anything. Negotiate severance proactively. Extra pay, extended healthcare coverage, accelerated vesting, outplacement services, or reference letters are all levers you can request. Think carefully about Social Security, claiming at 62 locks in up to a 30% reduction. Each year you delay helps. Consider the rule of 55 for penalty-free withdrawals from your most recent 401k if you left at or after age 55. Avoid rolling into an IRA if you plan to use this. Secure health coverage immediately through COBRA, ACA markets, or Medicare if eligible to prevent gaps. Trim large expenses first: housing, transportation, and debt. Downsizing beats small everyday cuts. Maintain visibility in your field. Network, consult, or take part-time work to keep professional continuity and create bridging income. None of these steps erase the suddenness of a forced retirement, but together they make the difference between survival and collapse. They shift the story from being passively pushed out to actively managing the transition. And once those basics are stabilized, legal protections checked, income sources mapped, health coverage secured, the next stage opens up. Retirement does not have to mean the end of earning altogether. The question then becomes, if work in the traditional sense is no longer available, what other income streams might be built instead? That's where the conversation goes next. Alternate income streams in retirement. Retirement may cut off a traditional paycheck, but it doesn't have to cut off every chance to earn. For many older adults navigating early exits, the question quickly becomes, what alternate streams of income are both realistic and sustainable? The truth is, you don't need to reinvent yourself or build a six-figure business online. Even modest secondary income can cushion savings, delay Social Security filing, and provide stability that is otherwise missing. The focus should be on practical, lower-barrier opportunities that are achievable today. One of the clearest paths is consulting or freelance work. For anyone who has built up decades of professional knowledge, there remains a market for it long after leaving an employer. A former HR manager can advise small startups on compliance or onboarding. An engineer might contract for a mid-size firm needing part-time design support. Retired teachers can help local schools develop curriculum part-time or tutor privately. Consulting is practical because it allows you to set your own schedule and define how much you want to work. Importantly, studies of retirees show that these projects often pay at rates equal to or above what traditional employment might have offered, although usually for fewer hours. That balance, moderate pay without the full burden of a 9-to-5, helps cover expenses while preserving flexibility. Another promising option is part-time or remote-based work, chosen strategically. The current labor market relies heavily on flexible staffing, and companies hire for tutoring, customer service, transcription, and virtual assistance. A retired professional with good communication skills can handle remote customer support entirely from home. A retired teacher can tutor students by video call without traveling or managing a classroom. These jobs do not recreate the intensity of full employment, but they provide supplemental income, often a few hundred to a couple of $1,000s monthly. For many retirees, that small stream changes financial math significantly by filling gaps between Social Security and living expenses without exhausting savings. Retirees should also be aware of early withdrawal strategies available through their retirement accounts. The Rule of 55, as outlined by financial advisors and sources such as Kiplinger, allows someone who leaves an employer at age 55 or older to access that employer's 401k without a 10% penalty. Similarly, 72T distributions, known as substantially equal periodic payments (SEP), allow for early access to IRAs or 401k(s) under strict schedules. These don't represent new income in the sense of consulting or tutoring, but they are structured ways to tap retirement money early without heavy penalties. They can serve as bridge income that delays Social Security, which is hugely valuable long-term. Used carefully, these strategies reduce the financial pressure of sudden retirement while preserving more of the account balance. Digital income opportunities have also lowered barriers for retirees. Unlike starting a large business, these streams can be small but scalable. A retiree with expertise in gardening could self-publish a short ebook of planting tips. A former corporate trainer could design an affordable online course teaching presentation skills. Someone with a craft hobby might sell products through Etsy or a similar marketplace. Bankrate and Investopedia both point to these digital ventures as low-cost ways to generate incremental earnings. It's not about huge profits. It's about time-flexible income that adds $200, $500, or $1,000 per month. Consistently applied, even modest side earnings give retirees breathing room and slow the drain on retirement accounts. Housing offers another overlooked income source. Research from Next Avenue shows that many older adults offset early retirement by downsizing or monetizing part of their homes. A spare bedroom can be rented long-term or occasionally listed on short-term rental platforms. Parking spots or storage spaces can also be rented in urban areas, producing steady cash without the workload of a traditional part-time job. These small moves might sound simple, but they generate reliable monthly amounts that offset major costs like utilities, groceries, or healthcare premiums. For many, it's a realistic bridge that combines practicality with immediate impact. Importantly, some of these options require digital literacy, and that can feel daunting. But evidence from initiatives like Get Setup and studies by the World Economic Forum shows retirees are embracing online learning to pick up new skills. Older adults are enrolling in short, targeted courses to learn basic freelancing platforms, video conferencing tools, or e-commerce listings. The takeaway is that you don't need to master every tech trend to participate. You only need the specific skill for the stream you want to try. If tutoring online appeals, start with a short course on using Zoom or a tutoring platform. If selling crafts online interests you, complete a basic course on listing products. Practical, one skill at a time learning makes these opportunities accessible rather than intimidating. The key in exploring alternate income is to set the right expectations. These options won't usually replace a lost career salary, and they're not meant to. What they do is add stability. A retiree making $400 to $600 per month from tutoring, consulting, or small digital projects gains a huge benefit: the ability to avoid early Social Security claims or unnecessary withdrawals. That small addition is often the difference between running out of funds too quickly and stretching resources over decades. The emotional benefits count too. Earning something, even modest, preserves dignity and purpose at a time when both feel under pressure. Patterns are already clear. Professionals with transferable expertise thrive in consulting or short-term contracts. Those with teaching or mentoring backgrounds succeed in tutoring or training. People with hobbies and crafts find workable markets online through digital shops or publications. Those living in homes with extra space can create income by downsizing or renting out rooms. Each income source is modest on its own, but combined, they extend financial independence longer than savings alone could. Retirement today demands more creativity than in decades past, and that isn't necessarily bad. The options may not look like the traditional pension and gold watch model, but they keep families solvent, confidence intact, and communities engaged. Retirement, forced or chosen, is no longer a single exit point. It's a restructuring of work into forms that fit later life. Every strategy, consulting, tutoring, digital creation, home rental, represents a small but controllable way forward. As more people experiment with these approaches, they're rewriting what the end of a primary career looks like. And while the focus here is on boomers, the importance of diversifying income in retirement is not limited to them. The adjustments today highlight something broader. The world that younger workers will inherit carries the same risks of sudden job loss, rising costs, and fragile income systems. How older adults adapt now creates a preview of what others will someday need to consider too. The generational wake-up call. Why should someone in their 20s or 30s pay attention to what's happening to baby boomers facing forced retirement in 2025? At first glance, it may look like an age issue that doesn't apply to younger workers for decades. But in reality, what is happening now is a generational signal. The lessons embedded in the boomer experience point directly to how younger workers should prepare differently to avoid the same future shocks. This isn't about sympathy. It's about recognizing patterns and adjusting while time is still on your side. The vulnerabilities that caught boomers off guard are not confined to this one age group. They're features of how modern employment operates. Employers restructure to cut costs. Technology advances in ways that replace tasks once central to jobs. Economic downturns and sudden crises force unplanned exits. Those are structural trends that will not disappear. They will surface again, only under different names, new technologies, and fresh industries. The key takeaway for younger workers is clear. Forced retirement is not an anomaly. It is part of a repeating cycle in the workforce, and the only defense is preparation. For boomers, a common assumption was that long service guaranteed stability. Staying loyal to one company was expected to create a secure exit later on. But loyalty didn't protect them, cost calculations did. When firms needed to slim budgets and reorganize, those with the highest salaries and steepest benefit burdens became the first candidates for cuts. The same dynamic will apply to millennials, Gen Z, and the workers who follow them. Corporate strategies haven't shifted away from rewarding efficiency above loyalty, and younger employees should not mistake consistent service as a shield against change. Technology provides another repeating lesson. Boomers face pressure from artificial intelligence and automation reshaping industries, but every generation before them has also met its own version of technological displacement. Clerks once replaced by spreadsheets, factory jobs replaced by robotics, analysts now replaced by algorithms. The story is the same. Skills that once seemed untouchable eventually become routine for software or machines. Younger workers entering the market today may look comfortable with the current tools, but 30 years from now, new platforms will redefine what companies expect. The cycle repeats endlessly, placing everyone eventually at risk of being labeled outdated. This means that sudden exits are not a distant risk for someone early in their career, just as boomers have. seen their timelines cut short by recessions or pandemics, the next generations will likely face their own shock events. It could be a market collapse that closes industries overnight, or a step change in technology that makes entire departments redundant. When these events arrive, they rarely match people's expectations of when retirement is supposed to happen. For someone now in their 20s who envisions leaving the workforce at 67, the actual age might be years earlier if external disruption dictates otherwise. Learning from the boomer timeline is about recognizing that rigid plans alone do not protect against accelerated change. So what should younger generations be doing now? The lesson isn't just that vulnerability exists. It's that there are steps to reduce exposure. Research from Transamerica shows that younger workers, especially Gen Z and millennials, are beginning to save earlier than previous generations. That head start matters. The difference between starting in your 20s versus your 40s translates into hundreds of thousands of additional dollars in sustained retirement savings, simply because compounding has decades longer to work. The building blocks for avoiding the same fate are practical. Start with early and consistent retirement contributions. Even modest amounts added now can grow into substantial balances over 30 or 40 years. Keep an emergency fund strong enough to cover at least 3 to 6 months of expenses, so sudden job loss doesn't turn into immediate financial collapse. Diversify retirement accounts. Combine employer-sponsored 401(k)s with IRAs or other investment vehicles when possible to spread both risk and opportunity. Continue to upskill regularly, not just during transitions, but as an ongoing rhythm, so you remain relevant when industries shift. And look for ways to generate secondary income, whether through side projects, freelancing, or digital ventures. Each of these strategies reduces dependence on one salary and one role, two factors that hurt boomers most when their careers ended abruptly. The data provides some optimism. Transamerica's surveys report that many Gen Z and millennial workers are saving earlier than any previous generation. For example, younger workers in their 20s report starting retirement saving in their teens or early 20s, giving them decades of compounding that late boomers missed. That is a decisive advantage if carried forward consistently. It shows that generational learning is possible. By observing the shortfalls of those older today, younger cohorts are already adjusting. The emotional lessons reach across generations too. Many boomers describe losing not only income, but also identity when their roles were eliminated. Work had defined who they were, and when it ended without warning, they felt invisible. Younger workers should recognize this as a signal to diversify identity just as much as income. Side projects, community roles, or personal interests outside of employment give meaning that remains even if a career ends early. It's easier to build those buffers gradually rather than trying to rediscover purpose later under pressure. All of this points to one simple but memorable checklist for younger workers. Emergency fund plus consistent retirement contributions plus continuous skill updating plus side income plus low debt. This formula doesn't guarantee freedom from disruption, but it prevents a single layoff from cascading into a full-blown crisis. It spreads risk, builds resilience, and ensures that if companies make cost-driven choices, individuals remain less exposed. The wake-up call isn't about fear, it's about opportunity. Watching boomers adjust under stress highlights what the next generations can improve. Many of the tools already exist. Financial literacy is accessible online, low-cost retirement accounts are widely available, and digital platforms make side income more achievable than ever. What matters is not waiting to build resilience until it's too late. Put simply, what is happening in 2025 is not just a snapshot of one generation struggling. It's a workable preview and a real-time guide for anyone younger who chooses to pay attention. If you absorb these lessons into your financial and professional decisions now, you change the shape of your own retirement decades down the line. The larger point is this: forced retirement is not a distant story reserved for older workers. It is an event that can ripple forward through every age group over time. It will affect you more than you think, but unlike the boomers facing it today, you still hold the advantage of time to prepare. And holding that advantage creates the next question. What does real preparation look like in practice? And how do you set it in motion before disruption arrives? How to prepare before it's too late? If the risks of forced retirement feel overwhelming, the most useful question becomes, what can you do right now to avoid being caught off guard? Later, this is where preparation matters. Some factors, like corporate restructuring or technological change, are outside your control. But the preparation you put in today directly shapes how resilient you will be tomorrow. Security isn't about waiting for conditions to become fairer. It's about building personal defenses so you have choices instead of scrambling. The first priority is creating an emergency fund. It might be the most repeated advice in personal finance, but it's also the most decisive when disruption hits. Without a cash cushion, sudden job loss forces you to raid retirement accounts or fall into debt within weeks. With one, you buy yourself breathing room. The practical target is 3 to 6 months of essential expenses in a separate, easily accessible account. That fund works as a time buffer, protecting you from making panic decisions and allowing you to plan carefully after a layoff. Boomers who had no such buffer often turned immediately to credit cards or early withdrawals, draining their retirement futures. Building this fund is not glamorous, but it is the absolute baseline of resilience. Next is the discipline of consistent retirement contributions. Time is the factor that multiplies money, and every year skipped reduces the growth potential of your savings. Contributing even modest amounts in your 20s or 30s can translate into hundreds of thousands more by retirement age, because those dollars spend decades compounding. For workers already in midlife, there are powerful tools still available. U.S. tax law allows catch-up contributions for those 50 and older, extra amounts beyond the standard limits for both 401k plans and IRAs. According to Wealth Trace data, these catch-up contributions can make a meaningful difference, particularly for people in their final earning years. Setting up automatic increases so that contributions adjust upward each year ensures this habit continues without effort. For anyone watching, the practical move is simple. Check the current catch-up contribution limits and increase automatic deposits today. Debt control must sit alongside saving. It's not much protection to have retirement accounts growing while heavy liabilities consume paychecks. Debt magnifies vulnerability because payments continue even if income does not. Many boomers faced forced retirement still carrying mortgages or student loans, limiting their use of limited benefits and shrinking their flexibility. Younger workers can prepare differently by prioritizing debt paydown during stable years. Every recurring loan retired early translates into a lower cost of living later. Keep cars modest, avoid lifestyle-driven borrowing, and treat debt as something to minimize, not normalize. A layoff with minimal debt can be managed. A layoff with stacked monthly obligations often accelerates financial collapse. The next critical layer is continuous skill development. Forced retirement often comes with a label: too expensive, out of date, or not aligned with future strategy. Boomers discovered that strong track records did not protect them from being dismissed as behind the curve. The protection younger workers can build is to keep their skills visibly current. That means taking free or low-cost online courses, earning certifications, and staying alert to new tools inside your field before you are forced to adapt. Most industries are shifting toward data fluency, automation, and digital collaboration. Even a few hours per month applied consistently can prevent stagnation. The message is simple: do not allow yourself to be fixed in place. The more flexible your portfolio of skills, the harder it is for employers to write you off when disruption comes. Networking and side income form the final pair of defenses. On the surface, they may not appear as urgent as savings or debt, but they prove indispensable during sudden transitions. A professional network built consistently, through industry groups, ongoing contact with former colleagues, or community connections, has the power to reopen doors that would otherwise remain shut. When boomers with solid networks were forced out, they often secured consulting contracts or part-time projects within months. Those without connections often faced dead ends in their job search. Building this network is not something to wait until crisis to begin. It must be maintained while still employed. Side income, even if modest, adds another layer. Freelance work, tutoring, a small business, or even rental income from unused space builds proof that you can generate money outside of your employer. At $200 to $500 a month, these streams may not feel transformative during stable years. But when the primary paycheck ends, that small stream becomes the bridge that prevents early Social Security claims or deep savings withdrawals. Consistently developed, it can also grow over time into a meaningful supplement for retirement. The practical advice here is simple: test one income stream while you don't need it, so that when you do, it already exists. Together, these 5 actions, emergency savings, consistent contributions with catch-up use after 50, debt control, continuous skills, and networking with side income, create a foundation of resilience. They do not erase shocks, but they decide whether those shocks become temporary disruptions or permanent derailments. Consider 2 simplified examples. Person A started saving early, contributed regularly, kept debt low, updated skills through occasional courses, built a small tutoring business, and maintained strong professional ties. When their employer restructured, they had months of expenses in reserve, consulting opportunities through their network, and a side income already in place. The transition, while stressful, was navigable. Person B postponed saving, carried large debts, skipped upskilling, and relied on one paycheck. When laid off at 61, their savings disappeared quickly, and without alternatives, they were forced to claim Social Security early and sell their home. Both experienced sudden job loss. One rebounded with flexibility, the other faced permanent damage. The difference wasn't chance. It was the preparation they, or didn't, put in place years earlier. The contrast highlights why preparation isn't optional. Each decision made in stable years either increases or reduces future resilience. Extra dollars left to compound, debts eliminated early, skills updated regularly, side projects nurtured consistently. All of these accumulate into protection against the unpredictability of work. None of them eliminate the risks, but they shift outcomes. They turn what could be a final, devastating cutoff into a difficult but manageable adjustment. Think of the checklist as a simple map. Save 3 to 6 months of cash, contribute early and use catch-up limits after 50, reduce debt aggressively, update your skills regularly, and maintain both a professional network and at least one alternate income stream. Each step can be implemented today, and each serves as a counterweight against the forces that push workers out before they are ready. Preparation is not about expecting an easy path. It is about ensuring that when the next disruption comes, you have built the resources to protect yourself. Employers will continue to make cost-driven decisions. Technology will continue to replace tasks. Economies will continue to cycle between growth and recession. But individuals who have followed the 5-part plan will have vastly more options than those who have not. And this brings us to the larger perspective. What is happening with forced retirement today shows us that work security is far less durable than many assume. The question is whether you choose to treat these lessons as distant warnings or as current action items. The people who act now, saving, contributing, upskilling, networking, diversifying income, are the ones most likely to retire on their own terms. And those who delay will face the same crisis with fewer tools. The choice, while it still exists, belongs to you. Forced retirement puts into focus how fragile work security really is. What's happening to boomers today isn't just their story. It's a signal of what any generation could face when companies decide the timing, not the individual. Research shows the median retirement balance for boomers is about $270,000, and roughly a third of older Americans have little or no savings. That gap is why preparation matters. The takeaway is simple. Use the checklist now, build savings, reduce debt, keep skills current, and set up side income streams. If this video helped, leave a comment on what surprised you most, like and share it, and subscribe for more insights on financial and career resilience.